I'm going to start with a little bit of an introduction, and we're going to go through the presentation. We may have some other people joining us, but I'm just going to go through the presentation as I have it prepared.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, if you have any questions, just interrupt me or put something in the chat box. I have the chat box on a different screen, so if I don't see it right away, you might want to alert me. So first of all, this is part of the UCA College of Education online degree program. We're offering this professional developments to market some of the work that we're doing at the University of Central Arkansas. This particular intervention today, the Interpreting Visual Aid Strategy, let me stop share here, and then I'm going to share screen something different. Here we go. Can you see that screen that says Interpreting Visual Aids Strategy? You can?
Yes, okay. I can see it.
So the Interpreting Visual Aid Strategy is part of the Learning Strategies curriculum. It is something that I have worked on for many years. I've revised it many times. So Wendy's joining us. Welcome, Wendy. You can either unmute and ask questions, or there is the chat box available. So we're going to be doing the Interpreting Visual Aid Strategy. It's part of the Learning Strategies curriculum. I've worked on it for many years. I'm at the University of Central Arkansas, and why this is significant is that the University of Central Arkansas has the Mashburn Center for Learning, and they do professional development to schools. They go to schools, they provide online courses in the Learning Strategies curriculum and all the interventions in the strategic instruction model. That includes not only learning strategies, but social emotional strategies and content enhancement routines. Content enhancement routines are specifically designed to teach content in the general ed classroom through a use of specific graphic organizers. This routine, the strategy we're going to have today, could be used as either a teaching routine in the general ed classroom or a learning strategy that's taught to a group of kids to help them use and interpret visuals. This research was supported by Edge Enterprises, who published many of the manuals, and the University of Kansas Center for Research on Learning, who has organized most of the research on the strategic intervention model. And so this intervention is part of the strategic instruction model, or called SIM. So are either of you familiar with any of the SIM interventions?
I'm not.
Okay.
This is Wendy.
That's fine. Well, you're going to get your first introduction today. The SIM model is one of the most validated models in education related to dealing with diverse groups of learners, at-risk students, and students with disabilities. It is an example of very direct, explicit instruction. And if you're familiar with the high leverage practices in special education, it meets the criteria for high leverage practices, and many of the practices in the HLP effective instruction are included in SIM interventions. So let's get started. So I have a PowerPoint presentation, which can send you. I also have this manual that we've been looking at. And this manual has introduction, who should be taught the strategy, the table of contents, and instructional methods. And the actual manual in this form, it probably won't be this form when I get done editing it, is about 126 pages long. So it's a significant gift. In probably about a year, we're going to have it published. And so those of you who are in this session get this as a freebie for participating in this professional development. Okay, so we're going to get started. Let me check a message that I just had. Okay. All right, I was having trouble there. Okay, so this is the Interpreting Visual Aid Strategy. It is part of the Learning Strategies series. I've just been working on it and updating it for 2021. The purpose of this strategy is to, and this session is to explain, model, and practice the interpreting visual aid strategy. We probably won't be doing a whole lot of practicing, but we'll do it together as a group. The objectives. When you're done, I hope you could explain the interpreting visual strategy, state rationales for teaching the interpreting visual aid strategy to students who are low achieving and students with learning disabilities, although I've used this with students without disabilities just to help them pay attention to visuals as they read. I'm going to describe and model the interpreting visual aid strategy, and hopefully we'll look at some pre-tests and scoring. So first, we're going to start out with an overview of the strategy, the materials and how they're organized. I'm going to go back and forth between my PowerPoint presentation and just images that I have from the manual. There's also an option for some pre-teaching activities, and then what we call the instruction are stages of acquisition and generalization. How do you help the kids acquire the stages and the steps of the strategy? And then once they've learned the steps of the strategy, how could you get them to maintain it and generalize its use to other settings? Because the use of visuals you see in the newspaper, you see in directions to put things together. So it has a lot of for both in school and out of school students in terms of how it's best used. And also, for those of you who want to take it and try it and give me feedback, it's not real research, it's just give me any feedback on things you think should be done differently, things your students had problems with that I can possibly use to improve the manual for other teachers. So why this strategy? I've been asked for this strategy for a number of years, and the reason why is because what we know about kids and visuals is that they don't use visuals often when they're reading. What we know is that this strategy will help you meet standards in disciplinary literacy. When kids get texts, they can read these texts with visuals. You can link the visuals to information provided in those expository texts. You could also teach this strategy. So for when a teacher's presenting information in a class on some kind of display or a slide, you can help kids interpret the visuals that teachers are using. Then they can use that information in assignments, research papers, answers to chapter questions, and answers on tests. The strategy is specifically tied to the Arkansas standards for the 6th to 8th grade standards, for reading standards in literacy and history for 6th grade. That standard is to integrate visual information, charts, graphs, photographs, videos, and maps with other information in print and digital text. For science is to integrate quantitative or technical information expressed in words and text with a version of that information expressed visually, flowchart, diagram, model, graph, table. So the standards specifically ask that teachers teach how to incorporate visuals and refer to visuals as they are reading. For the 9th to 10th grade standards, we move to integrating quantitative or technical analysis with quantitative analysis in print or digital text. In science, translate quantitative or technical information expressed in words in text into visual form and translate information expressed visually or mathematically. So once students learn how to read and interpret text, they're more likely to be able to use visuals to present their own information. Finally, the 11th and 12th grade, integrate and evaluate multiple sources of information in diverse formats, visually, quantitatively, as well as in words, so both text and visuals, to solve to answer a question or solve a problem. Finally, in science, integrate, evaluate multiple sources of information presented in diverse formats and media in order to address a question or solve a problem. So all throughout 6th grade through 12th grade, the college readiness standards, we see that these standards are important. When I discussed the intervention with some of the folks at ADE, they specifically said they wanted to see the intervention because they didn't have any good resources to teach how to use graphics and visuals in text as kids were reading, and they would like to know more about it. So once we're done here and we get this revised, we're going to be sending this to ADE. The purpose of the strategy is to teach students how to incorporate information and visuals cited in text. Okay, so as kids are reading, we want them to not only read the text, but pay attention to visuals. We want to teach them how to distinguish how different types of visuals present different types of information. So what's the difference between a diagram and a map and a picture and other types of visuals? To give students ways to interpret the information presented in visuals, and teach kids how to describe the important information in verbally or in writing. So not only are we asking them to read, use visuals, but also express information about what they've learned from visuals. Okay, I need to shift to the PowerPoint presentation. I'm sorry I didn't do that. Thank you for the cue. Okay, so let me go back here real quick. So we started here within the title page and our purpose of what we're going to learn today, and learning about the rationales, what it is, describe, model, maybe try to do some practicing. We're going to go through a step-by-step of the stages of acquisition, which is how we teach. We know the standards must meet the disciplinary standards, and I've already went through the disciplinary standards with you without you seeing them, but there they are in the presentation. And in the purpose of the visuals is really teach them how to find the visual, interpret it, talk about it, think about it, and then be able to express it in writing. And here's where we pick up with the PowerPoint slide. I want to place those of you who are not familiar with the Learning Strategies curriculum. There are 3 types of interventions in the Learning Strategies curriculum. Now, there are many different types of curriculum within SIM. We are just talking about the learning strategies. And within the Learning Strategies curriculum, there are strategies for acquiring information. One is word mapping, which is looking at roots, prefixes, and suffixes. One is word identification. When you're reading a textbook at a middle school and secondary level, written at a 7th, 8th, 9th grade, and you're reading at a 4th grade level, what do you do when you come to a word you don't know? Paraphrasing at the end of a paragraph, put it in your own words. Fundamentals of paraphrasing and summarizing, which is for younger students. Self-questioning, how do you ask questions as you read? Visual imagery, how do you create movies in your head as you read to improve comprehension? How do you use inferencing to get at the information? And finally, interpreting visuals. How do you incorporate visuals as you read? What's important here is that most of these interventions, besides fundamentals of paraphrasing and summarizing and word identification, typically require a student to read approximately at the 4th grade reading level, which means that they are past the decoding stage and they're moving to reading whole paragraphs, but then when they read a paragraph, they can't tell you what they've read. And so self-questioning, visual imagery, interpreting visuals, inferencing help with those students who are decoding but aren't comprehending. One of the characteristics of students who have dyslexia, once they learn how to decode and are fluent, their underlying problems in reading shift to comprehension. These strategies specifically deal with those kids who have underlying language problems and who need a structured way to improve their comprehension. Word mapping and word identification deal with the word level, and the rest of these deal with the paragraph and section level comprehension. In addition to acquisition strategies, and I'm moving this because now you have the information. How do you remember it? By first learn mnemonics, paired associate memory techniques, listening and note taking. Listening is, while it's an acquisition activity, most of the time we measure note taking by a student's ability to take notes. And so we combine listening and note taking. And then links. Links is a vocabulary learning strategy which requires a student to name the word, develop a definition, create a sentence, and then a picture to learn the vocabulary word. Then finally, once they store the information, they acquire it, they store it, then there are a variety of strategies for expression and demonstration of competence. Sentences, paragraphs, monitoring after error monitoring after you've written a piece, themes, assignment completion, taking a test, essay test taking, inspect, which is looking for errors, and then spelling errors, and then an edit strategy for editing your work. The most popular one amongst teachers tends to be the test taking. What do you do when you have to sit down and take a test? Not studying, but what do you do for good test taking behaviors? The interpreting visual strategy has been one of the last strategies we've developed because it requires a little bit of some comprehension of text in order to go support it with a visual. So when a student learns this strategy, they will learn to take action to interpret a visual, use the features within a visual to guide their thinking. They're going to use higher order thinking strategies like causal reasoning, comparative reasoning, and inferential reasoning, and then create a summary statement at the end that they can use to complete assignments and explain visuals in class. Rationales. What we know is expository text like science and social studies, and if you notice the standards that I listed for Arkansas primarily list my chat window keeps going away. Let's see here. Primarily list science and social studies. So these texts usually support understanding of complex information presented in the narrative. This is really an important point. Most textbooks only put visuals in when they repeat information that's provided in the narrative of the text, which means that the author has chosen that this information is so important, it warrants another presentation to make it easier to understand. What we know, though, is graphic presentations of information have been found to be very effective in teaching students who are low achieving as well as students with disabilities, which means when information in text, which may be hard for students with reading problems to read, can also find that information in a visual, they are more likely to comprehend that more difficult information. And so this becomes really important that we really teach kids how to move from the text to a visual to reinforce their comprehension or to check their comprehension or to increase their comprehension. Students who are low achieving or have disabilities often skip these. When we did early research on textbook comprehension, we found out that kids read the text but skipped over any kind of visuals in the textbooks. Higher achieving students looked at the visuals as support and repetition of the information in text. Students often don't know how to integrate information presented in visuals with information presented in the narrative of a textbook. So even when we say pay attention to the visuals, they really don't know how to approach the visuals. So students need to learn how to stop, examine the visuals, and integrate information presented in visuals with text as they read. Students don't know how to integrate information presented in visuals with information in text, and writing is often a difficult task. So students learn through practice to write fluently and about visuals so that they can be certain that they'll get past the test. One of the things that I like to make a analogy to is a comparison to is what we know is that when a high achiever, a good reader, starts reading a passage, they read, they get to the bottom of the page and say, oh, yes, I understand this, and they can answer questions. A student who is a poor reader, who does not have strategies to stop and then pay attention to what they're doing, they don't even ask the question, do I understand this? They just keep reading all the way to the end. This is very similar to what kids do with visuals. They read the text all the way to the end, and they may not even know what they've read. And certainly if the visuals are there, they don't stop and think, oh, should I look at this visual to maybe help me understand the text? So using visuals is a very metacognitive task. The student has to pay attention, stop, and tell himself, should I look at this visual? Now, sometimes, and I would say this, there are some textbooks that are what I would say dumbed down. That means that they are written at a lower reading level and provide less information than a regular textbook in the class. In some of these textbooks, when they put illustrations or pictures or graphs, they often put pictures or illustrations just to make it look nice, make it look inviting. And so we don't want students to be paying attention to graphics and visuals that don't have important information in it. So it's really, whether it's a modified textbook written down at a 3rd or 4th grade reading level or a grade level textbook, we should be teaching students how to use the text. I have found that when we say a student reads at a 4th or 5th grade reading level, as they are measured by an achievement test, that is not exactly the correct way to think it. They're not reading like a 4th grader. They're reading like a 9th grader who has scored on a 4th grade test, but that 9th grader brings all kinds of other information and knowledge and experience to the reading task. So even if they scored possibly at a 4th grade reading in decoding or comprehension, they can actually read textbooks that are much higher. And it's better to keep those textbooks as an important part of their education, as opposed to give them textbooks written at a 4th grade level that have less information in them. What we know is that when students are placed in classes where they all have their peers are reading at a 4th grade reading level, they perform more poorly than if they were integrated or placed in a general ed classroom with their peers. This is actually the results of some results. This was originally, it's not one of the tests we use in Arkansas, but it was on the Iowa Testing Basic Skills. They have a specific subtest on there for social society, science, visuals, and graphics. So the pretest this was the this is incorrect here. This is the percentage of visual cues that they got. Pretest, that's not right. I'll have to look over here. It's over here. Second. I think that the data that I have, oh, here it is. Let me do this. So the results of students learning the vision strategy. So there was 2 tests. One was main ideas and details. Could they give us the main idea and details for each visual? And then the other was a comprehension test. The teachers created a comprehension question over each visual. The results were on the pretest. Students scored an average of 27% on being able to identify main ideas and details. On the post-test, they were able to identify 75% of the main ideas and details. On the comprehension test, they moved from 30% to 80%. So what we know is that before they learned the strategy, they were scoring like this, and after they were scoring like this. And if you notice, if you score like this and you have a quiz, these are Fs. And if you score down here, this would consider Cs and Bs. So what we know is that we can move the dial. In this particular study, this was just data from the actual classroom activities. But we also gave the subtest of the Iowa Taste of Basic Skills, and they scored about 40% higher than the control group on being able to interpret visual aids. So we know that the strategy is powerful. Okay, now let me switch to my every time I do this, I lose my chat and my participants. Do you have any questions so far? That's you. Some people sometimes have questions about the data from the intervention.
No questions so far.
Okay, all right. So one of the things too is that this manual can be adapted in many ways. You can do it within one grade level. You can have multiple teachers do it, reminding them. If all the teachers know how you're teaching visuals, you can do it across grades. It can be done with individuals in a tutoring session, small group, large group, elementary, secondary, and post-secondary. We use this a lot of times in adult education settings where there's lots of technical manuals. And we know that when we started to get to employment kind of manuals and training, some of those textbooks are written at a very high level and have lots of illustrations in them. Another way adaptation of instruction is, and one that I recommend, is a teacher uses this strategy as a routine to say, hey, we're reading along, let's take a look at this visual, and they actually go through the steps of the strategy together with their class and say, okay, what type of visual is this? What should we be looking at? Are there things we can compare, there contrast? Okay, so if we were to summarize what this is visual about, what would it be? A teacher going through the steps and having the kids write this, the kids then learn the strategy or learn the steps of the routine the teacher is walking them through. And then the teacher can gradually say, now in groups, I want you to do this independently. And then finally, individuals. It can be organized in tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 kinds of interventions. Many schools in Arkansas are adopting the Extreme Reading Program, which is written for middle school and high school programs. And that is a self-contained, that is a reading class for kids who are reading at the 4th grade reading, they're in high school, and they are implementing a variety of reading strategies, including the interpreting visual strategy. The instructor's manual that I'm going to provide you is going to have all the instructional methods. It's going to have evaluation guidelines. There's also what's called a pre-teaching of visual types and forms, concepts and descriptions. What I did when I wrote the manual is I thought, well, a lot of kids might have learned about maps and tables and graphs and what they are in other classes. And by the time they get to this class or this grade, they know what maps are. They know what kind of graphs and tables are. They know what diagrams are. And so, but some kids may not. So this is an optional lesson for pre-teaching different kinds of visuals, what they're supposed to be presenting, and then descriptions of types. So we'll go through the kind of visuals in this presentation that are included in the routine. All the instructional materials you'll need, so you can make copies of progress charts and graphs and materials. Right now on the web, if you go to Open Resource, there are lots of open source textbooks where you can make copies of visuals for lots of practice with students, because all you need is a visual. I like to copy the 2 pages or the pages of reading with the visual, because then I can have the kids read and then it'll say something, look at figure 4. So then they have to go find figure 4. So I like to have books and use the regular classroom textbooks. So they're reading along and they have to find the visual and then interpret it. Okay, and then, and so as I'll get better at this, but the commercial available materials change all the time. And the best materials are really now in the open resource sections of on the web. So how do we teach the interpreting visual aid strategy? Okay, in a minute, I'll tell you the steps, but this is how we teach it. Stage 1 is we pre-test and obtain commitment to learn, which means that we give them, and I'll go over the pre-test in a minute, but the obtain commitment to learn is we show them the results of their tests and say, I have a strategy that I want you to learn. It's going to help you learn how to interpret visuals. I need to make a commitment. I want you to write it down. And then I keep that commitment, because anytime in the process when they decide they don't want to, I bring out the commitment and say, remember when we talked about this? Remember how it's going to help you? And I make sure that I have that commitment written on paper. I describe the strategy very explicitly. I then model it, thinking out loud. Then as an individual or a class, what we do is we do verbal practice, which we memorize together out loud the steps of the strategy. I can give them quizzes, we can do oral practice, but kids often like this step. Stage 5 is controlled practice, which means I give them easy visuals to look at and to give them practice. Gradually, I increase the difficulty of the text until I move to the text they're using in their general ed classrooms and give them feedback. When I give them feedback, I tell them all the things they did great. I tell them the things they need to work on. If there's something I need them to work on, I'll say, let me model for you how I would do this. And then after we do that, I say, now you try it. And then we set some goals for how they're going to get better in areas that they need more work on. And then we do a post-test. And the post-test is really your last advanced practice. Your post-test is really the last piece where you say, look, you got it. And here's your post-test. You got a perfect score on it. This is the one we're going to show your mom and your dad and everybody else before we move into generalization. And generalization, and I want to say something about generalization. Schools, teachers, whether special education, general education, remedial education, get a bad rap because they teach something and then 4 weeks later the kids don't remember it. Generalization is to ensure the kids remember it. So for the interpreting visual strategy, we go through some phases to make sure this happens. One's orientation, which means we have them bring in textbooks from all of their classes and try the interpretive visual aid strategy on newspapers, other textbooks, recipes, recipe books, cookbooks, any kind of books where a visual might be presented, where the strategy may be hard to implement because it's such a unique source, even math textbooks. So what we do is we do well, how would we change that? How would we change the strategy? What would we do? Then we do activation, which means I give them assignments. Okay, we struggled with using this in language arts. Your assignment is to use this in language arts, or your biology class. And so they have an assignment to use it, and then they have to bring back the results. And in a group, we talk about it. Phase 3, adaptation. I have included this in this manual. It's included in some of the other strategy manuals, but adaptation is the phase of generalization where we look at the steps of the strategy and we change them. If something's not working, or there's a situation where the strategy doesn't seem to be working, what we do is say it's okay to change the steps of the strategy now that we know it. And we are going to maybe add a step or remove a part or add a different piece to this to make it work. Maintenance is to set goals, and then later on, a month later, 2 months later, 3 months later, say, all right, we're going to do a check. We're going to see them do a maintenance check. And the maintenance check would be, I'm going to give you a textbook, and I want you to, for the first 5 visuals you come to, I want you to do a visual interpretation, record it on here, and I'm going to ask you some questions about it. So the message is that I didn't teach you this strategy just for that period of time, that couple of weeks where we worked on it. I want you to remember this now and next year. And so we do a maintenance goals to make sure that they remember them. Many special ed teachers have gotten a bad rap because they had the kids mastered something and they went on to something else and they didn't implement generalization. Well, I would say that if you teach something and you don't pay attention to generalization, you might not have bothered teaching it because you probably wasted your time. Always include a generalization maintenance plan after they've mastered something, or incorporate that and build on that in future instruction. So in the intervention, every student needs a folder, an envelope, and a pre-test envelope is if they put notes or something, somewhere to store their notes and their pre-test, because right away you're going to be giving them their pre-test back and their results. They're going to sign a commitment paper that copy of that might go in there. And right as soon as you start teaching, they're going to be taking notes and they're going to be keeping it in their folder. You want the folder kept in the classroom so that they don't forget it, and they'll have it each time you teach it. So we pre-test. If they get mastery, then they go to another strategy. If they get no, then we go on to describing and the rest of the stages of instruction through controlled practice, advanced practice, and then generalization. Who should learn this strategy? Students must be able to decode words and comprehend passages in text at the 4th grade level or higher. Students must be able to, now if they are using textbooks that are at a 3rd grade level, and they're reading at 3rd grade level, and those textbooks have visuals or graphics, you can teach those at that controlled level. You're just not going to move them up to more difficult text. You're going to be using in the text that they are working on and that they're reading at. So you're just not going to move up towards to higher grade levels. You're just going to have them read the visuals in their text for the grade level that they're on, if there are visuals there. Students must be able to identify the topic, create a main idea statement, and provide details that support the main idea statement. So you're going to be able to ask them, what is this visual about? That would be the topic. What does it tell you about that? So if it says, what is this visual about? It's about the history of space flights. Well, what does it tell you about the history of space flights? It tells me that over a period of this year to this year, there were 7 space flights. Okay. What else can you do to support that? Well, it says the very first space flight took place this year, and the last one took place at that year. So we have the topic, space flights, we have a main idea statement, and we have some statements that would support or prove that main idea. If students can't do that, we have a strategy called the paraphrasing strategy and the main idea strategy, which helps kids, young kids, and kids who are older learn how to take a paragraph and identify the topic, the main idea, and the supporting details, and put it in their own words or paraphrase it so they're not using the same words as in the paragraph. So that might be a strategy that would be good for kids to learn before they do this, because at the end of the interpreting visuals, they're going to have to do those things. So in our pre-test, we're going to obtain the measure of the current functioning using visuals. In fact, what we're going to do is we're going to have them take a textbook from the general ed class, and we're going to say, I want you to read the visuals in the first 5 visuals in this text. And then we're going to score them. You're going to score them and then ask a comprehension question about them. So you'll have a set of comprehension questions about each one, and you will have them write down what they have learned about each visual. You don't tell them, I want you to write the topic and the main idea and the details. Say, I want you to write down what you have learned from that visual. Once you have done that, you talk to the student, give them feedback, obtain their commitment. Let's see, I'm going to do this, stop share. I'm going to share over here. We're going to go back to this. So here, in here, we actually, when we This is the descriptions for the pretest, pretest and obtain commitment. And so you're going to be using textbooks from the student's regular classes. For each student, select one chapter from book or manuals that the student is currently using that has a variety of visuals inserted throughout. The chapter should cover information that the student has not previously read. In the chapter, the student should have the opportunity to interpret at least 2 different types of visuals within the first 5 visuals. Visual includes pictures, diagrams, tables, and maps. 1 comprehension question for each visual. Then in the back of this manual, there are evaluation guidelines. There's a score sheet. There's a place for you to create your comprehension quiz. And then you should have available the student folders. And it actually in here, it tells you how to prepare for the pretest. You should allow 20 minutes for it. And then it actually gives you the instructions on what you say to the student to administer the pretest. And I was wrong in before. It says, second, I want you to state the main idea of the visual aid. Third, I want you to state at least 2 details. Make sure the information you write down is important. You will want to include facts that you might be expected to remember for a test. Write them down as though you are taking notes. So the specific guidelines for administering the pretest are there. Score the responses, score the comprehension quiz, communicate your test results to students, and then obtain the student's commitment to learn. And then there are procedures to do that. Mastery is 80% or above on the visuals questions and 85% accuracy on the comprehension score. It tells you where to go next. And if you have troubleshooting, and it says here, if they don't understand main idea, the paraphrasing strategy might be appropriate to teach before you go on and use this. Then if we go forward, the describe step is where you actually present the strategy. And again, it's very specific, what you want to accomplish, what you're going to need, how to prepare, tells you what copies you need to make, and then how you introduce the strategy to students. So the manual gives you what I'm giving you in a PowerPoint. The manual gives you very good details, almost scripted. And when I say scripted, you just say something like it. You don't have to read it. I have a lot of times teachers, the very first time they teach us, read it verbatim. That's fine. The next time you teach it, you're probably going to vary a little bit. What you want to make sure is you can vary it, but make sure you cover the important information that's included in the manual. When we first wrote these manuals, they were a lot smaller. Like I believe that some of the manuals that are now 100 pages were only like 10 pages. But when we gave them to teachers, the teachers asked us, well, how would you explain that? Can you give me an example of what to say for that? And so that's what we did. And so the manuals got a lot larger, so there's a lot more cues. But I want you to know that you have some discretion in terms of presenting in a different way. Okay, so let me find my PowerPoint now. There it is. Okay, so here's an example of a score sheet. So you get a point if you give the main idea, point for details, and if it's not complete or if it's not accurate, if it's not from the visual, if it's repetitive, if it's not meaningful, if it's not useful, or if it's too general, you put an X. And the X is provided to say that I need to tell the student the reason I gave them a 0 for main idea is because it wasn't complete. They didn't give me a complete sentence. We require complete sentences in all the responses. If they got a 0 on a detail, maybe it was repetitive. They said the same detail twice. And so these are just checks so that when you sit down with a student, you can give them appropriate feedback. I didn't have a chance to do a blank one of these, but this is a one where we have the main idea for the main ideas and details and the comprehension scores. And this is a chart, pretest score, and then the controlled practice attempts, the grade appropriate practice, and the post-test, and then after the intervention, a place to chart progress goals. We also ask the student to set goals. So if, when do you think that you're going to be able, that we'll have you'll learn the strategy steps. You'll be able to get through the described steps. So 9/12, well, we actually completed the described step on the 16th. So when we do models, 16, so you first set all the goal dates, and then you actually, when you get done, you record when you've done. This is really good because it helps the kids realize and learn how to set goals, and then how to monitor whether they're ahead or behind in terms of their goals. So this student, the goals were to be done with the intervention by November 11th, 7th. They finished December 17th. Every time we do this goal setting, kids learn more about how long it takes them to learn different parts of an intervention. So when we do the scribe, we give rationales for the strategy, general characteristics like you're going to use this strategy whenever. Here's an example situation, like where would you use this at home? Where would you use this at work? What classes would you use this in? If you use this in class, what do you think you're going to be able to do? You'll probably be able to give more thorough answers on your assignments. Well, we set the goals for when they think they're going to learn it, and then we begin describing the steps of the strategy. Oh, here's the results of the strategy that I presented earlier. Okay, now this is the part where I'm actually presenting to the students. All right, so this is the strategy. This is the strategy starting right now. And one of the first things we do is we start out with asking, do you know what a visual aid is, or a visual? And then a student might say table. So you might say a graph is a visual. A graph is one of many types of diagrams that you might see. And so we're going to talk about how we have named different kinds of visuals and what are the subtypes of different visuals. So we have a whole set of introduction, and let me show you that part. So here, give the students an advanced organizer. We're going to start learning about this, and it talks about defining visuals. It talks about what we mean by clarifying information. Where might they use these? Newspapers, film strips, posters. Rationales for using this, discuss benefits in school, employment, daily living, and then the kind of situations that they're going to find where they might find this useful. Prompt students to think of situations at school while reading a textbook, during a teacher's lecture. That many teachers now use graphic organizers to teach, and so they are diagrams that fit within the strategy. And so we even share data with students. We say, look what these kids did. And that's right after that is when we ask that for that commitment, and we set goals. Here's approximately the goals we have them set. It takes about 3 days to describe a strategy, 2 days to model it, 1 to 2 days to memorize the steps. There's about 30-minute periods. 5 to 10 days of controlled practice, 5 to 10 days of more advanced practice in their textbooks or their classroom, and post-test, and then our generalization activities, 10 to 15 days. So this intervention isn't something that you cover in 1 day and forget. This takes 3, 4, 5 weeks, 30 minutes a day to actually get mastery and implement the intervention with fidelity. But because it is part of our standards, and we can use it in science, and we can use it in social studies, we can use it as a classroom activity where the teacher leads the student through this, this becomes something that you can incorporate into your instruction. We ask the students to make cue cards, these visuals, and to take notes on. I'm going to switch now. These overhead transparencies that I'm using are in the manual, and they are called cue cards. They are cards that the students can I either give kids blank sheets of paper and they write what I have on the overhead, or sometimes I give them the overhead and they add information to it, so it has meaning to them. But what you don't want to do is just hand them the PowerPoints or the cue cards and then just have them listen. You want them to actively be involved. And so if you want to use the closed procedure on this, or give them just like visual signal importance information, and then they have to write the rest of it, do that. Make sure that they're engaged. Just don't hand them the PowerPoint. I'm guilty of that because I get a PowerPoint and I don't write anything. I just listen to the presenter and it's all there. Well, that means you're less engaged. That means you're not going to remember as much. So first of all, we want kids to know that visuals signal importance. They're there for a reason. They're expensive. Actually, publishers pay a lot of money and they limit authors on the number of visuals that they will publish in any textbook. So usually an author will make sure that if they're going to include a visual, it's important. So visuals focus your attention on the important information. And it's the most important information from an author or publisher because it costs a lot of money. Visuals illustrate information presented elsewhere. So visuals help you understand by showing, not just telling. They help clarify, explain, and repeat information. So it may be once in text, but it's also going to be here. So if you see a visual, probably somewhere in that text, that information is presented again. Visuals organize information. What we know is students, many slow achieving students, average students, don't know how to organize information, don't know how to take notes. So if they're just reading, taking notes from the textbook, they're probably going to struggle. So visuals help organize information in an order and a form that makes the information easier to learn. One of the rules of content enhancement routines, which uses graphic organizers, is to use graphic organizers to help kids take notes from lectures and presentations. This is the steps of the visual interpretation strategy. I've called it a lot of things. I've called it the interpreting visuals strategy. I've called it the vision strategy because that's the acronym. I was called interpreting visuals. You could call it whatever you want. I've changed it in different ways throughout the intervention. Step one is you're going to verify the visual. And this is the part where we want the kid to make sure it's important, that it's repeated in text, that is something that's going to help them learn, and this is information they need to learn. This means don't skip over it, pay attention to it. There are cues in text. There are cues that a teacher says, like, look at the map at the back of the room, all right? So these are words that are cues to say, I need to pay attention. The next is isolate emphasis cues. Every visual has certain features to it that highlight information and tell you what to look for. Step three, specify the type of information. Specify the type of information. Forget the structure, that's a mistake. Just specify the type of information. Information can be numbers or it can be explaining something. Then identify the structure of information in terms of how it's organized, and then offer conclusions, and we're going to look at that. And then finally, this is the place where we make a statement. So these first two are looking for clues and making sure you understand the visual. The SIO steps are really the parts where you're thinking about the visual and interpreting it. And the sixth step is where you are making a statement about what you have learned about the visual. So when you verify the visual, the word verify means to prove its worth or to justify it. Okay, it means it's proving its worth, or to justify it means this is important. It's worthy of your time. It's justified for you to study this. So you're going to verify this. So when we verify a visual, we are judging whether or not a visual is worth studying. We want to prove to ourselves that this is an important visual to what we are learning. We verify or justify the use of visuals by looking for three types of verification clues. These clues means relationship clues, direction clues, and visual type clues. Now, when I first started working at this, I said, this is a lot of time just to decide whether a visual is important enough. But once we start teaching kids, they started using these cues to look at the visual and make sure that they connected that visual to the text. And so we found it was time well spent. Question one, does the visual aid provide information about the topic? Okay, if you're working on Magellan and circled out the world, and then over here's a map of his journey, you can say Magellan topic, yes, here. Will this information help us understand the topic? If the answer to the question is yes, ask the third question. Yes, this is going to help me understand Magellan's journey. So the two match, and it matches to the topic. What is the type of information is presented in the visual? So it's a map. So that what kind of information does maps show? And so we take a look at that. So I have, it's a type of visual I know, it's related to the topic, and I think that it'll help me understand it. The first kind of clue is a relationship clue. Relationship clues help us to see the relationship between the topic or task and the visual. Relationship words clues, if a teacher says, this map shows you, this figure depicts, the data I'm presenting are depicted in figure 1. The crossing of the Delaware is illustrated in the picture that you see in the left margin. The history of pottery is displayed on that timeline. All of those words indicate that what I'm saying here is shown elsewhere. So that shows there's a relationship to text. The text is specifically cueing you that there is a visual that's related to what I'm talking about. So the map on page 65 in figure 5 shows the route that Magellan took when he sailed around the world. The relationship word here is shows. I know that if this says shows, I'm going to go find a map. The next is direction clues. When you are reading a textbook or looking at written presentations of information, you will look for cues that as a visual is related to the text. Our example on Magellan says in figure 5, that is a direction cue. It tells you to go look for figure 5. It gives you specific information. Here, see figure 2. It might just say that in parens. There are many journeys by many explorers during this period. See figure 2. And it may not even say anything else. As shown in figure 3, or this information is depicted in table 4. So depicted, shown, and figure 3 depicted in table 4 on page 215. It gives you directions about where you should look for the visual. So show, depicted gives you a relationship to text. Figure 3, table 4 on page 215 give you the directions. These clues give you directions where to go. The next is the type of visual. All right. So although after you locate a visual and you understand the relationship that the visual has to the information being presented, you'll identify the type of visual that is being used and remind yourself about that kind of information. Now, there is a pre-lesson that if kids need to know more about and more in-depth knowledge about pictures, maps, diagrams, and tables, you can do that. You can do that here, or you can do it as a pre-lesson before you even begin this intervention. But that's up to you. Or you can go through this and realize they're struggling with it, and then before you go on to modeling, you can do that, insert that lesson. And that is in the back of the manual as an appendices. So these are the types of visuals. Older students might be able to know these really well. Younger students might need more instruction. A picture. A picture presents information about the likeness of living or non-living things. A map shows information about a land or some area of the world. A diagram or graph. We put a lot of visuals under this category because it's all the different kind of graphs, bar graphs, charts, organizers, those kinds of things. Shows information through special arrangement of symbols, pictures, text, or numbers. But then we have a separate column called table. A table presents information arranged in rows and columns. So even though there may be numbers in a diagram or graph, we're looking specifically at tables arranged in rows and columns. So these are the 4 categories of visuals. If you want to separate them out, diagrams and graphs, and make a different definition, certainly welcome to do that. It's just that the table and the map and the picture are unique. Diagrams cover a whole lot of different visuals. All right, so step one, let me go back here. Step one is to take a look at the relationships. Here, let's go back. We have our relationship cues, we have our direction cues, and we have our types cues, types of visual cues. Those three things prepare a student to then interpret the visual that they're looking at. Okay. Step three. Once you start looking at a visual, you are really into the interpretation phase. In this case, there are cues within the visual that can help you identify the most important information. If you were just to, off the top of your head, I'm going to ask you, Fran and Wendy, what cues, if you were to take a look at a visual, let's say this one, what are the kind of things that are unique that tell you something about this visual?
Well, I've looked at the title. I mean, that's unique.
Yep.
About it. I would reference my map skills that I have as
Yeah.
the map. And
So
I would start looking.
So you know it's a map. There is a caption at the bottom that explains more. So there's print on here. It names the states. There's a title. There is a caption, figure 3, and it has information about it. What else is unique about this that kind of gives a hint on what the author wants you to be looking at?
Well, at first I thought it was maybe like arrows or directional things, but I think I'm not correct on that.
Well, look at the bottom of the caption. Most of the Indians living in the eastern United States in the early 1800s were forced to move to what is now Oklahoma. To most early Americans, Indians were thought of as savages who stood in the way of progress. So you're right. I think those are arrows. People from Delaware, they moved over here, which is not quite Oklahoma. I think that is Kansas. And then the Sauk Indians, Seminole, Creek. So we have the names of the Indians. We have arrows showing move to Oklahoma. What else is unique about this? You have a legend, so you have a title, Removal of Eastern Indians from those period of time, and we also have a scale to show miles. Okay, so we can figure out how many miles it is. All right, okay, good. So let's go back a little bit now. So step 2 is look for emphasis cues. What inside the visual do you see that helps you interpret it, to emphasize certain things? What we look for is our print, any kind of print, captions, labels, names, titles, any lines, for example, arrows, unusual features. Sometimes they will put pictures to indicate something, or they will like on the water cycle, they will put clouds and rain and pictures to indicate the water cycle and the parts of the water cycle. Those would be unusual features. Numbers might be like miles on a legend. Unusual features could be a legend. Colors or shading, all of those things are emphasis cues. Now, I've put down here in the bottom another version of this. Now, kids like the word plunk, all right, because it's a strange word. It's not like any other word. It's I'm going to plunk this. I'm going to look for the print lines, unusual features, numbers, and color. I'm going to plunk it. And sometimes nonsense words are more memorable than actually making words. But for those of you who are more inclined to want to have the kids read real words, we could also rearrange this and make the word clues, captions, print, lines, unusual features, explanations such as key and legend, and shading, color and shading. So you can use either one of those lists. I've used this in the text because I find kids like it. It's a strange word and they want to plunk it. And so here we could say like here's unusual shading right here. And so this has many of the plunk characteristics that we just talked about. All right, so now with this, the next part of the strategy is to specify the type of information. Okay, here. Visual aids provide two types of information, numbers or explanations. Numbers usually are presented whenever a visual aid uses numbers to explain how quantities are related. Bar graphs, for example, pie charts. Explanatory is information can refer to people's, places, events, things, or ideas where numbers are not that critical. Now, there could be a combination of these things, but tends to be it's presenting numerical information where the numbers are the important outcome or an explanation of something that's happening. We say that a visual presents explanatory information when it does not show numbers or when the numbers presented refer to dates and not quantities. So dates could be time over period, dates over a period of time. Explained information can refer to people, places, events, things, or ideas, or what they're doing. This is a numerical. It's showing numerical information about a population. So over a period of years. Here's explanatory information. Here we really don't have numbers at all. It's talking about the sources and the kind of vitamins we get from each one. So we have one example of explanatory and we have an example of numerical. The next thing we do is, now we know it's numbered or categories of information. Visual aids can present information that is structured or organized in two ways. It's either ordered, there's a sequence involved, like a timeline, or the water cycle, and it's showing the process of a water cycle, or cause and effect, or it's grouped. It's grouped information. Ordered means that the information has been ordered according to some criteria. Ordered information can also be presented in a sequence. It can be ordered according to time, importance, value, or any other known criteria. Here's an example of a visual that has ordered information. Let's see. Okay, this is a sequence of time from 1961 to 1986 on terms of space flights. Okay, let's go back. If the information if in a visual is not organized in a sequence or ordered, it is organized into groups. However, the information may be arranged in equally important groups or categories, but also sometimes we can have both. So let's take a look at the next one. Okay, here is a sequence. Here's the water cycle. You can definitely say the arrows here point to a sequence that you're supposed to follow. So that you want to say, well, what's the first thing that happens, the second thing that happens, the third thing that happens, the fourth thing that happens, so you can identify a sequence. So kids should be looking for, is there a sequence involved, or is there just groups of information that I need to be aware of? All right. Here's grouped information, a pie graph. Okay, there's no sequence here. It's just telling you the categories. Here's ordered and grouped, lowest point to highest point. And so they have different, if they'd organized these by height, then it would have even more ordered. So here you might have a combination. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. Do you have any questions?
No, I do not.
Okay, we're gonna take about a 3 or 4 minute bathroom break. I know this is a 2-hour session, and I know that probably stopping midway through that you stretch, get a glass of water, go to the restroom is an important thing. So we'll give you about 3 or 4 minutes, and then we'll be back here. Okay?
Sounds good. Thank you.
Sure. I'm ready when you all are.
I'm here. I'm ready.
Okay.
I am too.
Okay, let's keep on going.
Sounds
Okay, so the next step, step 5, is where you take all the information that you've had so far. Because before we've had the cues, we've had, is it ordered or is it grouped? Is it cause? We're looking for causal relationships here. We're looking for groups of information, which means compare and contrast probably. So we move to then the thinking part, offer the conclusions. This is where you think through it. You ask, based on the information in the visual, look for similarities and differences in this visual with other visuals, the text and what you already know. So how are they alike? How are different aspects alike, or how are they different? Is it that kind of visual? Causal, based on the information in the visual, look for similarities and differences in other visuals, the text and what you already know, and make a conclusion statement. So causal reasoning is looking for what caused or what processes are involved here. If in our previous one, this might be a causal or a process here, and that we want to summarize. And then finally, inferential reasoning. Based on the information in the visual, you make conclusions or make a guess about something based on hints or facts that you've learned. What might have happened? I usually look at pictures like this. Take a look at this picture. What might have happened before this picture was taken? What's going to happen, you think, after the picture was taken? What things would be reasonable to compare? Could you compare the different, what was going on with this space flight took place versus when this space flight? What could you conclude about the order of space flights? So you begin asking questions about comparison, likes and differences, causes, and inferential reasoning. Then finally, you get down to step 6. What is this visual about? And you ask, and this is how I have kids write and talk about the visuals. So what is this visual about? Student might say, well, it's about space flight. What does it tell me about? What does it tell me or show me about space flights? Okay, so we're still using the topic. It tells me that there were only 10 space flights between this year and that year. What details prove that this is the main idea? List at least two details that would prove your main idea, and then they would go back in and identify 2 details that prove the main idea. This is the same structure that's taught in the paraphrasing strategy, which is the intervention that I mentioned earlier about how to teach paraphrasing in their own words. But this structure helps them separate the difference between a topic, a main idea, and a detail. And we want all 3. They can write it down on a piece of paper, or they can tell you it. It kind of depends. If it's in class, this is a good prompt for a discussion of visuals when you come to something in text. Reading along, and you'll say, okay, as we've been reading this, it says to look at the visual over here at the side, figure 2. So what is this visual about? And so you can have a conversation with your class about how to interpret visuals and how them to summarize. Is it asking us, is there numbers involved, or is there just groups of information? Is it asking us to compare? Is it asking to compare? Is it asking us to look at cause? Or is it asking us to infer? Is there a process involved? So after you describe the strategy, you are asked to model the strategy, which is to demonstrate the entire strategy thinking aloud. So if let's look at our manual here for a minute. Okay, so if we scroll down, I hope you can see the manual. Am I right? So if you can see here, it talks about print, lines, unusual features, the different information that you'd be looking for. So let me show you this. The model step gives you instructions on and a script on how you take a visual, and it tells you how to present the visual, but think out loud. I'll be using these 4 visuals. I will use the vision steps at each visual. Here is a set of 4 different visuals. And so let me try the first one. First, I will look for the Plunk cues. I begin going through the vision steps. These cues will help me to answer the vision question. Second, I will identify the visual type. So what it does is it gives you the language to take any of these visuals and model how you would use them. If we continue, go down on the manual. So that's all the manual stuff. So nice detailed modeling. It gives verbal rehearsal and verbal practice, which you help the students remember all of those steps and stages. Okay. Finally, you have the control practice, which is practice in easy materials, and then more advanced materials, and generalization. So everything I'm presenting here is going to be presented in the manual. And what we have is presented, and all the visuals are included in the verbal practice. There's the steps again. And then verbal practice includes remembering the cues. There is a checklist for you to record student progress in remembering all the steps that they need to remember about the interpreting visual strategy, including the different types of visuals. And this goes back to the very beginning: controlled practice, advanced practice. There's even a place for you to list all the student names and then how, as they make progress through the intervention. And that actually, I didn't have to cut much, because that ends the presentation. And with the manual and with the PowerPoint presentation, you should be able to implement this strategy on your own.
Okay.
Do you have any questions?
No, sir.
Okay.
No, I don't.
Okay, well, I have more emails than I need, but I'm going to write down who was here today and make sure that you, I email you the PowerPoint and the manual.
Okay.
And I want you to take a look at UCA programs, and hopefully that some of this stuff has helped.
Yes, it's very interesting. I think it will help me.
Okay. And if you start implementing this and you need more help, I will be happy to meet with you on a Zoom or something and go through anything.
Okay. Thank you so much.